This is a relay project. Real Talk starts right now. Here's Ryan Jesperson.
A shout out to the show's intrepid producer, John Hicks, for that fabulous holiday opener on a special edition of the show. We're grateful to have you here with us. This is a week that, amid the reputation of the holiday month of mid to late December, where news typically grinds to a halt, it slows. We don't see a lot of big headlines. Well, it's obviously been the exact opposite of that with the surprise resignation. You might call it the snap resignation of the now former finance minister, Chrystia Freeland, who was to deliver the fall economic statement. Of course, she did not. But when Canadians got a peek of the budget realities right now, I think a shocking number, too. Nearly $62 billion, the forecasted deficit for 2023-24. In this episode of the show, we're going to dig into that with renowned economist Dr. Trevor Tombe, the president and CEO of the Canadian Chamber of Commerce, Candace Laing, and our good friend Shauna Feth, president and CEO of the Alberta Chamber of Commerce. We'll get a provincial and a national perspective on Canada's economic reality right now, not to mention the pending inauguration of 47, President-elect Donald Trump on the 20th of January. He's let everybody know. He's put Canadians and the world on notice that tariffs will be a big part of his economic plan. What impact will that have on our nation and you? That's coming up in 30 seconds. First, we want to let you know this episode of Real Talk is happening with the support of Business Career College, in the business of financial training since 1997. And they've got a new designation for those of you that are working as financial advisors, senior finance professionals. You know, polling shows that about 75% of the next generation of investors is curious about decentralized finance. They have questions about crypto assets, things like Bitcoin and blockchain and NFTs. You want to make sure you can meet them where they're at and give them solid advice. You want yourself to be well informed and prepared for the future of finance. The future is here, and you can prepare yourself for it by obtaining that Certified Digital Asset Advisor designation. That's the CDAA designation. You can learn more on the website, businesscareercollege.com. And with the promo code Ryan20, all one word, Ryan20, they'll knock 20% off your investment in this designation. That's Ryan20 when you sign up today for the CDAA designation at businesscareercollege.com. Well, let's get to it. We've got a Real Talk roundtable set to go. Shauna Feth, president and CEO of the Alberta Chambers of Commerce, braving minus 20 and blowing wind and snow to join us in studio. Wonderful to have you here, Shauna. You're joined by your colleague today, the president and CEO of the Canadian Chamber of Commerce, that's Candace Laing, and economist Dr. Trevor Tombe. To the three of you, thank you for joining us on the show today. Dr. Tombe, why don't we start with you? Obviously, a huge story out of Ottawa, the surprise resignation of Finance Minister, Deputy PM Chrystia Freeland. She says she'll run again as an MP, but she's not steering the country's finances anymore. What does a story like this or a development like this do to confidence in a nation's economics? What does this do to the international community? What sort of an impact do you see happening? We're now one day in.
And so we'll see how things play out from here. But the fiscal update yesterday was really nothing short of historic, not just because of the politics. Hours before delivering the fiscal update itself, Finance Minister Freeland resigned, and it was the Liberal House Leader who tabled the fiscal update instead. And this, I did look back to when these fiscal updates started in 1939, and as far as I can tell, this is the first time in history that a federal financial update has been delivered by someone other than the finance minister. And that's problematic in that the update itself did contain a number of substantive policies that were really meant to help boost Canada's economy and its investment environment ahead of some likely changes south of the border next year, including some reductions in taxes on investment, really just reversing course on the government's phasing out of certain business tax measures. And, right now we have a lot of uncertainty south of the border, and that uncertainty itself is a drag on investment. And because of what happened yesterday, and it's unclear where the whole government goes, or if the government will fall in the coming days, or when the election will be, there's a great deal more domestic policy uncertainty as well. And that itself will be a drag on investment and therefore a drag on growth and productivity. And that has real consequences for Canadians. And so I think we shouldn't, I guess, neglect the economic implications of the political machinations that happened yesterday.
Candace, welcome to the show. We've heard Dr. Tombe, you invoke the word uncertainty 3 or 4 times in his opening statement here. As far as I know, that's not a word that businesses love. It's not a word that investors love. What's your impression following that economic update yesterday?
Yeah, well, the eclipsed economic update, I think, is fair to say. And uncertainty, maybe I'll just back up. It's probably not easy to take Ottawa by surprise and the country by surprise as much as that happened yesterday. I was in Toronto with Chrystia Freeland on Friday as she announced some things in advance of yesterday's statement, and that was SHRED and related to CPP incentives to invest domestically, both of which she said I'll be speaking more to on Monday. And then Monday came, and I think we are now in a bit of a political emergency, and we experienced something that has never happened before. But having said that, I think the eclipsed part is unfortunate because, to Trevor's point, there are things in the fall economic statement that are newsworthy and deserving of our attention. And so I think I can share a few comments on that, which is, I think there was an attempt to, I think, lean into some efforts to bolster our competitiveness and retain capital, which we really need to do. However, I think it's the context around the statement, and happy to hear Trevor and Shauna's comments on this as well. It's kind of clouded and kind of in an environment that it doesn't cohere to that aim, I guess, when you have things in play like we've done with capital gains tax and the digital services tax. So some good things in there, but yet it doesn't all cohere in a level of comfort from the business community, I think, in what we would like to see and be experiencing with competitiveness and the retention of capital.
Candace, you're the first person I've spoken with that was with we'll call her Ms. Freeland. I guess I'm pretty used to saying Minister Freeland, have done for the better part of a decade, but you were with her within 72 hours of her resignation. I don't know how well you know her, but we're hearing from journalists that were with the Prime Minister, a couple of them on a flight that was without Wi-Fi. As the story goes, the plane lands, their phones fire up, and that's when he finds out that his deputy Prime Minister has resigned. For all intents and purposes, it sounds like the Prime Minister himself was completely taken off guard, was completely shocked by this. Did you have any sense or any inkling on Friday that something might be amiss? I mean, or was she sort of representing herself as though everything was business as usual?
Yeah, I mean, I was with her midday on Friday, and the media, I mean, there was a Q&A after her announcements, and the media was digging into getting more details on, the lack of support that was in the lead up that week. But as I understand things, I believe everybody, including the media that was digging as much as they could into the situation, were also surprised with this move, I think at 9:07 yesterday morning. And then the rest of the day, I think you could tell by the activities that it was catch up and figure it out, because there was no sense of that before it happened.
Yeah, I appreciate you taking us into that. Shauna Feth joining us in studio, President and CEO of the Alberta Chambers of Commerce. What sign, like in your impression, what sign does Minister Freeland's departure or resignation from cabinet sand. Dr. Tombe's talking a lot about uncertainty. Some people might invoke a similar word, instability, or do you see this maybe as a new moment of opportunity, a moment for this government to do what it can to, number one, survive, and number two, try to instill some confidence among Canadians?
Well, and I think that's the key word is confidence, really, Ryan, because the optics of this to international investors and what's happening internally within the country, we really need to be paying attention to, because it's going to have an impact on attracting investment, retaining investment, and we're already dealing with so many additional uncertainties when we talk about what's going on south of the border and how that relationship needs to be maintained. So, I'm just curious, what Mr. Trump is thinking when he looks at Canada right now and what's happened in the last 24 hours.
Yeah, well, Johnny, you pulled a post from the president's Truth Social account, which I thought was pretty interesting. And Donald Trump's a little bit different than anybody else, and so it's not like sort of your classic post from a world leader, but says Donald Trump, the great state of Canada, which he's fond of saying. I guess we should probably get used to that over the next 4 years. The great state of Canada is stunned as the finance minister resigns or was fired from her position by Governor Justin Trudeau. There you have it again. Says her behavior was totally toxic and not at all conducive to making deals which are good for the very unhappy citizens of Canada. She will not be missed. So pure class as always from the president-elect. I don't know, Dr. Tombe, if it's fair to say that Chrystia Freeland's behavior was totally toxic, not conducive to making deals. As far as I've heard from several Canadians, all things considered, she did all right negotiating with Donald Trump last time he was in office. What does your memory invoke with it, between your ears?
That's right. So if we think back a few years to the renegotiation of NAFTA between Canada, the United States, and Mexico, a moment of incredible importance for Canada, just how much of our economy is tied to trade with the United States, and the prospect of losing access to that critical market if NAFTA were to just end and the United States pulled out. It's really hard to overstate the consequences of that economically. The government, led by Minister Freeland and contributed to by many others across the political spectrum, really did successfully negotiate a new trade agreement between the three countries that was, in most important ways, substantively quite similar to NAFTA. And so I'd say that's a huge success. And it's interesting to see that post from President-elect Trump, in that it was a deal that, at least at the time, he touted as a great success and a deal that was an improvement for the United States. And so I guess I won't presume to know what's going on in his mind, but it was certainly a success from the point of view of Canada and Canada's economy.
Yeah, we've got obviously a lot to get to today, and I do want to talk about Donald Trump and Canada's relationship, trading and otherwise, with the United States. But there's also, the big story too yesterday, and I'm just saying anecdotally, I saw it across all of my social media channels. People going $62 billion, the $62 billion deficit. Candace, what sort of an impact is a big number like that? Maybe unexpected, maybe not, depending on who you talk to. What sort of an impact does that have on a national economy, including the people that are doing business?
Yeah, I think one of my favorite quotes from yesterday was when the fall economic statement was presented, and I think it was someone from the opposition stood up and said, "Well, okay, is this a big deficit or a super duper deficit?" And I think from the business community's perspective, just the lack of fiscal accountability, even on getting the data out of previous year's financials, and then the uncertainty around this one. But I think when we went through the pre-budget consultations, we pushed pretty hard on let's get back to fiscal first principles and look at a review of all government spending and target, a reasonable percentage in savings. And, after reading Ms. Freeland's statement, if we're pivoting to that now, I think she had a really good call out in terms of, let's keep our fiscal powder dry, because we do not know what's coming early in next year. And the other just lack of, the rainy day fund and those reserves that we should always have, but now need more than ever, given what we're heading into. So also, think it was a really good thing, I think it was 4.8 billion. Trevor, you can always correct me on my numbers. That's why I love doing panels with you. For the $250 checks, that's our understanding why they weren't mentioned in there, and that makes some good sense and was probably part of the tension leading up to what we saw yesterday.
Yeah, Trevor, why don't you jump in there? I mean, sure. Freeland made no bones about it, was not a fan of the $250 checks. Everybody was talking about how she was getting set to pull those back. And then she confirmed the rumors that everybody was buzzing about, which was that this entire thing, including the Prime Minister's announcement about this GST holiday, had actually driven a big rift between her and Trudeau. She's been Trudeau's right hand this whole time. This isn't your average cabinet minister resigning. This is a big deal. What were you noticing in particular, Dr. Tombe?
Yeah, well, I couldn't agree with the sentiments that she expressed in her resignation letter more. I mean, this is a moment with a great deal of risk where the government's exposed to uncertainties, of course, with development south of the border. It might need to use some of its financial firepower to help support economic activity in a worst case scenario. But that aside, if there is a big shock, say a trade disruption, that's going to potentially lead to a recession next year or the year after, depending on timing and how large the tariffs, how broad they are that the U.S. Is potentially going to levy. And that itself will lead to an increase in public debt, as recessions normally do. And we do need to make sure we have that capacity to absorb these kind of shocks. And so when the former minister refers to fiscal firepower, I think about it as ensuring that our debt relative to the size of our economy is at levels that can absorb these big negative shocks. And the government really hasn't tried to bring the level of public debt back down to pre-COVID levels over any reasonable horizon. And what we see and what we saw yesterday again was not just an increase in the deficit for last year. Much of that was actually kind of an accounting issue around booking today anticipated payouts related to Indigenous court rulings in the future. But if you look over the future, like today and the coming years, the deficits are projected to be larger still, about $47 billion in additional borrowing between now and 2029. And that's ratcheting up higher and higher and higher, again and again, levels of spending, compared to the budget that we had just a few months ago, earlier this year. We're projected to be spending about $5 billion more than the government's own plans for this year, and about $26 billion more this year compared to the government's own plans for this year that they set in budget 2023, and fully $63 billion more than, again, the government's own plans for this year that they set in budget 2022. So we could have had this year a $15 billion surplus, despite the shrinking tax revenue from the slowing rate of economic growth, if only the government just stuck to its own plans over the past 2 years. And so that's the kind of financial discipline that's missing, where every few months their fiscal policy, their approach to public finances just changes in a way that exposes us to a great deal of risk.
Quick follow-up there, Trevor. In your estimation, I'm asking you more of a political science question here than an economics question, but do you think that, people will look, for example, at COVID spending, governments around the world, and say, well, you got to look at that as a bit of an outlier, right? Governments were faced with huge challenges. Businesses were faced with huge challenges. You can't hold that up as kind of like a normal trend. On any graph, it'll look way out of whack. But in this situation, you're out of the pandemic, but this is a government that's experiencing some real popularity problems, a government that's looking at a more of a survival issue. In your mind, is the increased spending or the spending outside the plan more of an attempt to survive politically, or are there other economic factors at play that maybe any party might justify spending more than they planned?
Yeah, I think a little bit of both, in fairness. What we've, of course, seen with the GST changes or the plans for the $250 check, I think that quite obviously was just aimed at addressing a political challenge of the government. But if we think back to 2022, when inflation rates rose considerably, really changing the circumstances that many families faced for the worse. We hadn't seen inflation accelerate as fast as it did in 2022 since the 1950s. And we saw governments of all political stripes, provincial conservative-led governments here in Alberta, for example, and elsewhere, coming out with measures that provided direct support to individuals. And so if we think back, I guess a year and a half or so now, when the federal government boosted its GST credit and rolled out other measures in support of individuals, those are kind of measures that I think any party would have taken. And so I think the increase in spending that we're seeing is a little bit of both. But looking ahead, we're past the pandemic, we're past the acceleration in inflation, and the government in this update still ratcheting up by nearly $50 billion what it plans for public borrowing between now and 2029. There's just no kind of anchor that over the medium run we return spending to. If it was just about one-time blips in spending during extraordinary moments, then we wouldn't see increases in the size of government looking forward. And that's exactly what we do see.
Shauna, small and medium-sized businesses, we know by the numbers, drive Canada's economy. That's a fact. Employment as well, obviously, but rising debt oftentimes fuels future tax increases. How concerned are your members, or what are your members with the Alberta Chambers of Commerce thinking about tax hikes or maybe even reduced federal supports in coming years?
Yeah, and I mean, we've seen reductions in programs and services to small, medium enterprises across the country, but in Alberta, really having impacts on things like, just access to like the Canada-Alberta Job Grant, for instance, with those transfer payments, not being able to do that training. Obviously, any tax increases are concerning, reducing like the barriers and the ways that we are inhibiting business from actually moving forward in terms of investment or in terms of diversification with products and programs that are being reduced from the federal government as a result. And I would say too that one of the things, I'm just going to give Alberta a bit of a pat on the back, but if Canada could take, sorry, I have a sore throat and I'm struggling through trying not to cough.
I think you're doing great, by the way. People don't see your whole pile of fisherman's friends just off camera. You're fighting through it. You're playing hurt.
Yeah, try not to cough. But I mean, when you look at the province of Alberta, the fiscal framework that Danielle Smith's government put in place in terms of when there's, when you're looking at how you fiscally are responsible to the taxpayers, that reinvestment into things like the Heritage Trust Fund, that repayment of debt, and doing that in a really thoughtful, logical way, I think the government of Canada could definitely take a look at that and implement some of that policy. And I'm sure Trevor could speak more to that too in terms of what kind of impact that has. But it's just that confidence in terms of investor confidence in the jurisdictions that you're looking at coming into. And boy, this is, like I said earlier, like this is going to have a real impact on that confidence. Trevor,
what is the tale of the tape? Shauna teed you up nicely. What do we know about the impact of those measures, those incentives?
Yeah, well, the fiscal framework that she referred to there in Alberta, I think that is an interesting example that might provide a lesson for our other governments. And just to be quite open about it, I wasn't a fan of the fiscal framework when it was first brought out by Alberta. I was kind of skeptical that the government would follow through with it, and I guess we'll have to wait till next year's budget. But at $69 per barrel oil prices, Alberta will have a deficit next year. And there are components of this legislated fiscal framework that governs what spending will be in the coming years if oil prices stay low. And of course, there's pros and cons, and people can disagree over whether they think spending should be restrained in those situations. But it's kind of a formula that determines what spending will be until we return to surplus. And in the event that we do not within 3 years, then there will be some tax changes at that point. And so what it does is it really guides fiscal policy choices, really dampens what would otherwise be a pretty uncertain moment, and I think does go quite a bit of the way towards alleviating some of the uncertainty that we've been talking about today. And so if the government does stick with its fiscal framework through what for Alberta is a difficult time with oil prices where they are, then I think that will be a success and a lesson for others, and something where I'm guessing that I was wrong initially, but we'll see. And hopefully that if the government does stick with it, that'll be a really positive change in how Alberta approaches finances.
We've been doing interviews, you and me, Doc, for I think at least 10 years, and I'm not sure that I've ever heard you say that you were wrong before. That's like a stop the presses kind of a moment. But I appreciate that. I appreciate that people can look at something and go, hey, listen, I thought this way and my mind was wired this way. And now upon due consideration, I might be changing my mind. Maybe not. That's why people tune into the show. That's why people want this brand of real talk. Candace, what are your membership across the country, right? So you've got a really fascinating, significant sample size. Do you find sort of like differences regionally to how your members feel about what Dr. Tombe is talking about? Or would you say that entrepreneurs, business investors across the country are typically on the same page on this file?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think there's a lot of shared sentiment when it comes to the concern around, the fiscal policy, and I have to add on, just the regulatory framework that all of our businesses, small, medium, and large enterprise operate within, and some consistency and certainty would just greatly benefit all of Canada's businesses and the economy, and thereby all Canadians as well. And I just can't stress how much that sentiment is shared. And my colleague Shauna can probably just attest to that as well. I think what, if I can add, concerns me more greatly as of late, and is a concern also for business, is kind of this decoupling between affordability and economic concern, because they're absolutely inextricably linked. And curious how Trevor sees this happening, but I just see, I think we used to have sort of a greater effort, nationally around economic literacy. And I heard someone say, I wouldn't do the attribution anyways, but I don't know who it was yesterday as I was listening to everything, saying, well, we're doing things for business, obviously in the fall economic statement, but what are we doing for affordability? And I just thought, here we are, with these things, like we're looking at them, talking about them separately. And they're absolutely linked, and we're not creating those linkages for Canadians to understand how we need a thriving business environment to bolster the strength and health of every community across Canada.
Trevor, she teed you up. You want to take that on?
Yeah, I think that's an important point, that when we talk about affordability, there's of course a lot of attention on prices, understandably so, given how rapidly they've changed. But the other side of the coin that I think is more important is incomes, right? Affordability is about how much goods and services we can purchase with the incomes that we have. And if income growth was faster, then our standards of living, our kind of real income, if you will, would be higher despite the fact that prices have increased. And how do you get income growth in a way that's sustainable over time? Well, you need productivity growth. And in Canada's case, about 90% of productivity growth since 2000 has been through capital investment, having more machinery, equipment, tools, and technology adopted by firms. That requires investments. And when there are policies that discourage investment, that will detract from the rate of productivity growth, and that directly translates into slowing the growth of incomes. And if we look since 2015, we've had productivity growth in the order of about 0.2% per year, and roughly that rate of income growth. Whereas for the 20 years prior to 2015, we'd typically see productivity growth of 1.5% per year, and that much overall growth in labor compensation per hour. And so having a focus to address our affordability challenges on boosting investment, boosting productivity, boosting the pace of growth, that's ultimately how we solve the affordability challenge, not with one-time measures that provide 2 months of GST changes or $250 checks.
Yeah, let me ask the two of you. Maybe we'll start with you, Candace. Your members, the GST holiday. We didn't have any sponsors of ours in particular request to go on the record about their feelings on this, but I think one of the benefits of partnering with this show is you get a direct line to us and help influence our editorial process. Sometimes we heard from several sponsors who do business. They participate in commerce. One of them in particular letting me know what a huge pain in the ass it was for their staff, including their software team, the teams at the tills, etc., to implement this GST holiday. I sat back and kind of marveled. I was joking with a buddy yesterday. I said the way that people's political inclinations work, Trudeau's the one that everybody's walking away from now. Everyone's suggesting it's time for Trudeau's walk in the snow, and Pierre Poilievre's got all this fervor behind him and the big new membership and obviously a lot of political momentum. And I was chuckling, saying, I guarantee you that if Pierre Poilievre had put something in front of Canadians to save them 5% on a lot of their holiday purchases, people would love it. This is a study on how the political climate influences how people feel about economic measures. But for all intents and purposes, Canadians en masse have said no thank you to this GST holiday. How has it had a real impact, like a tangible, real impact on your members across the country?
Yeah, well, we do have members across the country, and for the small and medium enterprise businesses, I mean, if you've ever, I can't believe how out of touch, the implementation of this seems, because you're absolutely right. It's a massive headache to try to figure out how do you change, your practices, just even, I think some of the discussion around this policy, the lack of understanding what point of sale systems, look like, and how you need to tackle that to implement something like this, was definitely like an obvious fact. I think one of the things that maybe got lost also is that there's a big difference across the country, if we look at this nationally, where you have 5%, as you just mentioned, versus the harmonized sales tax of, it can be 13%. So what do you do if you're, pausing the harmonized tax, like you're really carving out something from some of the provinces? Like what happens there? That was another big implementation question that I don't think was well thought through.
Shauna, what were you hearing from your members? Like, was your phone ringing off the hook? Was your email inbox flooded when the policy was announced?
Yeah, I mean, to Candace's point of sale systems are not easy things to program.
Yeah.
And when you're doing it for a short period of time, I think, so we have like the immediate impact, which is happening right now in terms of having to make those adjustments, knowing which products have the holiday, but then also looking to the future. So then having to rewind all that in February again, and like bring that all back when it's over, the holiday is over. So, you got to be looking at that. And then, just the concern that the grave concern from business owners about, so if I don't do this right, am I all of a sudden going to trigger an audit? Like, because I haven't done something right with this whole idea of this holiday in terms of the implementation. Is that going to trigger an audit at some point? And this is actual concerns businesses have right now around, how is this going to be administered, and even what kind of supports are there going to be from the CRA, and what is that going to take away from other business supports that are needed on other aspects of tax and that type of thing.
If I know anything about the CRA, I'm sure that they'll just be completely understanding. They'll give everybody the benefit of the doubt, right? That's kind of how the CRA operates,
of course
right?
They do.
Yeah.
Yes.
Hey, this is just one tiny little example, but somebody that I know well told me that they witnessed an exchange in a sporting goods store from somebody that at the till was arguing that a hockey stick was a toy, not a piece of sporting equipment, that it should be. And I mean, hockey sticks, geez, they're like $350 now. So this person was looking at maybe getting $18 knocked off, right, without the GST. But they were having a vigorous debate at the till about whether or not it was a toy or a piece of sporting equipment. Because I guess if it's a toy, it qualifies for the exemption. If it's sporting equipment, it doesn't. That's like one tiny little example of probably a million different conversations happening across the country. We're hanging out in studio with Shauna Feth. She's the president and CEO of the Alberta Chambers of Commerce. Candace Laing joining us, president and CEO of the Canadian Chambers of Commerce. And of course, University of Calgary, professor of economics, Dr. Trevor Tombe, our guest in this special edition of the Real Talk Roundtable. Back in just a second to talk tariffs. That's the big story come January. No matter what you're doing in Canada, business-wise or otherwise, it'll likely have an impact. But before we get there, let's talk Christmas dinner. What's your plan, friends? If you're living or you're going to be in the province of Alberta, if you're going to be hosting guests, friends, and family for a holiday dinner, why not leave all the work to Catering by Freeland Brothers? The Christmas dinner box is available for order. Still, not too late. This chef-prepared Christmas catering box feeds up to 4 people, includes traditional Christmas treats like roasted turkey, cranberry sauce, gravy, tray buns. They do such a good job with those. Pierogi casserole, and their fabulous honey dill carrots, one of my favorite side dishes of all time. There's also optional add-ons, including Ukrainian fried sausage. Yes, please. Freeland Brothers handcrafted pies, and of course, Granny's famous stuffing. You can order the box online today at cateringbyfreeland.com. I'm telling you, if you're looking for a gift idea for your loved one, maybe your life partner, you guys share a home together, this person has absolutely everything. Very difficult to buy for, but they're very disorganized. They've got every item of clothing they could possibly want, but nowhere to store it, nowhere to keep it. What about a custom closet or storage solution from California Closets? Now, you don't have to put the full bore under the tree. That's not realistic, but how fun would it be to put a consultation appointment under the tree? Put an envelope under there, maybe take them out to lunch, and then go sit down with the designers at California Closets. You share your vision, you let them know what your budget is, and then their design team goes to work. They're the best in the business with custom designs to fit your space and your budget. You can book that free consultation today by visiting californiaclosets.ca. And a shout out to our friends at Kubi Renewable Energy. It doesn't matter that the snow and ice is the story of the day weather-wise this time of year. They're thinking ahead to installation season. That's coming in the spring. And of course, they're going to be busier in 2025 than any year previous, which is why they have the "We're Hiring" sign hanging right now for all 4 of their HQs. Of course, they're proudly located in Edmonton, a beautiful new headquarters in Calgary. Shout out to Lethbridge and Kamloops, BC as well. If you're living in Western Canada or you're open to it, if you have experience in installing solar systems, selling them, dealing with customers, or managing an office, Kubi would love to hear from you. You can check out opportunities. They abound right now on the careers link at kubienergy.ca. Hanging out with Dr. Trevor Tombe, Candace, Laing, and Shauna, Feth. We're talking about bottom lines, the Freeland fallout, and Trump's tariffs. The United States remains Canada's largest trading partner by miles. Obviously, more than $800 billion in goods and services crossing our shared border annually. And the relationship has been based for decades on deep economic integration and a shared commitment to mutual economic prosperity. But the relationship is not without its challenges, obviously. And one of the most pressing issues that Canadians, business owners and otherwise, will face in 2025 is the promised imposition of tariffs. President-elect Trump says 25% is what Canadians can expect on certain goods. And of course, it's creating friction in our bilateral trade dynamics. These measures can disrupt industries, increase costs for businesses and consumers, everybody, on both sides of the border. It challenges the stability of the economic partnership as well. Dr. Tombe, why don't you set the table for us? When you see a number like 25%, acknowledging that in some circumstances, tariffs obviously can be fruitful economic policy for an America First type approach. What does the average person need to understand about what we could be looking at starting in January?
Well, we export to the United States about $550 billion a year worth of goods, put aside the services that we also sell to them. And so if we were to have a 25% tax levied by the United States on those, think of it like a $140 billion tax on what we sell to Americans as individuals and as businesses. And the economic implications of this is very large, mainly because it's not that we trade final goods with them, for them to consume, and then we purchase final goods that they produce for our consumption. We trade largely in what are called intermediate inputs and capital goods. These are items that businesses use to make other goods and services. And so when you have a tariff levied on these trade flows, what you're doing is really putting a lot of friction, a lot of sand in the gears of production supply chains that cross the borders and sometimes multiple times. So only about 1/5 of what we trade with the United States are these final goods that people consume. The other 80% are capital and intermediates. And so that tariff can be hugely disruptive to how we produce those goods and services. And so this is actually some work that I did with the Canadian Chamber of Commerce and the Business Data Lab, and a report released in October that kind of lays out all the pattern of trade, really highlights how it's important for both sides of the border, and then also tries to estimate what the implications of a tariff of that scale would be to both economies. And despite the fact that the US doesn't trade as much with Canada as a share of its economy, because of all these supply chain disruptions dragging down economic growth there, we estimated that in the case of a 10% tariff, which was kind of the original magnitude that Trump put forward, that would have economic costs on the order of about $1,000 per person, about $1,100 per person. And then with a 25% tariff, the costs only grow from there. And so depending on how and whether we retaliate, we could see Canada's economy shrinking by about 2.6, if I remember correctly, percent. And the US economy shrinking not by as much, but by nearly as much. And that's quite significant. If we think about shaving 2.5 or 3% off of Canada's economy, well, that right there is, at the higher end, about $90 billion a year in foregone economic activity at a time where Canada can ill afford additional drags on economic growth. And so a tariff of this magnitude, hugely consequential, not just for Canada, but for the United States as well.
I appreciate you breaking that down at like macro and micro levels. That's the way my brain works. I know that's the way a lot of people's brain works. They want to know what's the impact on an entire nation, but like, what's the impact on my household? What's the impact on my spending habits or my disposable income? Or, that's the way that families think, right? Candace, can you put that into terms that business owners will understand, or everyday Canadians, consumers for that matter as well? When Dr. Tombe talks about an economy shrinking by 2.5%. Nobody likes the word shrinking, but like in real life, anecdotal type analysis, what does that mean?
Yeah. Well, two things. It means everything's more expensive for us. So back to the affordability challenge. But I think what's really important and fascinating about this, and it stems from what Trevor was saying, because our economies are so integrated, it means the same for Americans, that, their real income is impacted to the same degree. Depending on what's included or excluded in tariffs, the price at the fuel pumps for Americans can go up, by a lot per gallon. And this, our trade relationship across North America has, I think, created 17 million jobs. Like, it's incredible what's at stake. And I think the point is, and what makes it real, is that it's for everybody, not just Canadians, but for Americans as well, which makes it hard to digest that we're actually facing this reality. And Ryan, to what you said, we've enjoyed this shared commitment to mutual prosperity. And now we are facing something that is different, this America First economic nationalism, a sincerity around an approach to tariffs, not just an approach to use to make deals at the table, but one that perhaps is needed for a particular revenue raise right now, and a shift in ideology that challenges how we think of North America as a strong economic bloc or not.
Yeah, well said. Shauna, I think a lot of people now are looking at these tariffs and they're starting to ruminate about, thinking or expanding businesses, trading relationships beyond the United States. Some of it is impossible or less likely. Some of it very likely. I mean, Alberta, for example, has the opportunity to strengthen domestic supply chains as well as growing trading ties in Asia and Europe. Where do you see the greatest potential for Alberta businesses to expand?
Yeah, and maybe can I just add on to my colleagues' comments around, this 25% tariff? And Trevor, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but one of the stats I heard is that 2/3 of businesses actually have cross-border locations. So they have offices in Canada, they have offices in the United States, and they have levers that they can pull to manage, what that's going to look like for them. It's that 1/3 of small, medium-sized businesses that is going to be most impacted by those tariffs. And that's where we're really paying attention and are quite concerned. In terms of some of the things that we can be paying attention to is, some of those additional trade agreements that we have, with Asia, with other markets, with European markets, really how can we leverage those to look at diversifying outside of the US in terms of where we're sending our goods and services. But I think one of the major opportunities we have here, and Candace is on the line, we've had this conversation before, and I know she's 100% behind this, is we need to look at interprovincial trade, and we really need to look internally at Canada and what we can do to fix the challenges that we have there. And I know Candace has these stats, but I think somewhere between, it's been estimated that we could look at raising our GDP anywhere between 2 and 4% or 2.5 and 5% or something like that. In terms of, we could right away offset the GDP gap from these tariffs if we could figure out internally in Canada. And again, this is back to our federal government in terms of how are we going to foster that idea of domestic supply chains and making sure that our goods and services can get from coast to coast, and that we would actually be able to really nearshore that and look at that as an opportunity for us domestically as well.
This feels like a tale as old as time. But I feel like we've been talking about this forever. Candace, what's so difficult about making this happen?
We have, I think it's 40 years at least that we've been talking about this. And look, I'll be a pretty straight talker on this one, because it's just a fact. We're freaking out right now about a potential 25% tariff with retaliation. Yes, we could head into recession next year because it's going to be a 2.6 hit on our GDP. We're freaking out about this. And yet we live with a minimum 3.8 hit on our GDP every single day in this country because we're actually not trading with ourselves. And, it's not for the lack of trying. There are lots of people who are trying, but I think 2025 is a window where we might have the energy. The Canadian Chamber entire leadership team across the country is going to put our shoulder into this, because it's our moment to address this. And some people look at us and go, good luck, but I think it's the right moment. And we need to tackle this, and we could literally, and I'll hand it over to Trevor here, but I'm optimistic if we leaned hard into this, we could curb the impact of really any recessionary impact from Trump tariffs and actually handle these negotiations with a decent position.
Trevor, you're nodding. Is this a tangible, doable, implementable solution?
It sure is. And I certainly won't be able to put it as well as Shauna or Candace just did. But without a doubt, the gains from improving internal trade are larger than the potential costs from even a 25%, even across the board tariff by the United States. And there are concrete actions that governments in Canada can take to improve the ability of businesses to operate across provincial boundaries, to sell goods and services to each other across provincial boundaries, and for individual Canadians to move across provincial boundaries. It really just comes down to the reality that in Canada, the rules, regulations, standards, certifications, and so on differ from one province to the next. We're not literally levying tariffs on each other, but there are costs nonetheless. And we have started to see some encouraging moves towards improving things. We have Ontario unilaterally recognizing certain health credentials for individuals who move into the province to practice. We saw just a number of weeks ago in late October commitments by provincial governments and the federal government to automatically recognize each other's trucking regulations to allow the shipment of goods across borders without having to reconfigure the truck or weight down to the lowest common denominator on different axle weight requirements and so on. And so moves like that, if we were to do it across the board, mutually recognizing each other's rules and regulations, that could have a very rapid positive effect on overall economic activity in Canada. And it's a challenge we've had for a long time, not just decades, but Interestingly, a royal commission in 1940 was complaining about local protectionism in Canada, and so it's an old problem, but one that we can solve, and one that other countries have solved too. Australia has made much more progress on improving internal trade there and did so in the 90s with this kind of broad-based mutual recognition of if the rules are good enough, sorry, if abiding by the rules are good enough in one province, then you're automatically good to go in any other province. And that kind of an approach is something that we can do. And given the uncertainties around the world and the potential headwinds that we face with trade with the United States, getting our own house in order economically and policy-wise, I think more important than ever.
In closing, I want to ask the three of you about a looming recession. That's the word that nobody likes to hear, but it's a reality. And we've got a question from Dwayne in our live chat I want to put in front of you. But first, we've got one here as well. And I thought that this was a good one in the live chat from Sean, our Real Talk live chat powered by Park Power, your friendly local utilities provider. Sean says about 20% of the oil that Americans use every day comes from Canada. Could this entire tariff scare be solved as soon as Americans start paying $1 more per gallon? Dr. Tombe, does this type of thing potentially backfire on the United States, on the country that's imposing the tariffs? Could the average, ordinary, everyday American feel pain if Canada plays it right?
So I do worry about going down the road of escalating retaliation. When we last saw an across-the-board tariff levied by the United States was 1971, and we did not retaliate at the time. That tariff was in place for about 4 months, and we tried to address it diplomatically. And this is way above my pay grade, but I'm hopeful that we can do so again. We're having an announcement today around $1.3 billion in border security measures. Maybe there's some other measures that we can deploy to address some of the concerns of the president-elect that might eliminate the incentive to levy these tariffs in the first place. But if we retaliate with large-scale measures of our own, that will increase costs to the United States, to Americans, to businesses south of the border, but it also increases costs on Canadians. And if we were to, as some premiers, Premier Ford, in particular, if suggesting we block energy exports, then that, yes, would increase gasoline prices south of the border, but would also create enormous economic costs for Canadians. And so I'm hopeful that we can avoid that route, because I do see the consequences for us as very significant. To retaliate well, we want measures that are costly south of the border and not on Canadians. So with the steel and aluminum tariffs a few years ago, we did retaliate on certain items that were very easy to substitute away from, certain automatic dishwasher detergents and soy sauce and certain kinds of mustard. These are things where, the economic consequences for Canada are pretty minimal. But in coordination with other countries, potentially that did result in consequences for producers in the United States. And so that's the smarter approach to retaliation, rather than cutting off what is the single largest export from Canada to the U.S., which is energy.
Yeah, no kidding. Thanks for the question, Doctor. Dwayne's been persistent in our Real Talk live chat powered by Park Power, and I understand why, because he's looking for advice from our panel, and I think that this is advice that all Canadians could heed. With threat of a recession looming, the question is, how can individuals and how can businesses best prepare themselves? Candace, why don't we go to you first? What are you advising your membership? What's just good advice, generally speaking, when it comes to bracing for potential or inevitable recession?
Yeah, well, bracing for impact is, I think, part of what we're feeling like from the business community. I think what we're also trying to do is be helpful in, and we're doing this across all aspects that we have, groups gathering within the Canadian Chamber of Commerce, is talking about the concerns, talking about the impacts, feeding that information to government, because this is a partnership. This is really an area where business and government are hand in hand. because the impacts are great. But coming back to Trevor's comments, if I can summarize, it's kind of you hope for the best, but we do need to plan for the worst. And that involves going through, and I think this is the government's job, unfortunately, what is every potential lever that we might have if we need it? And have we worked those through? And so that's the phase that we're in right now, Ryan. And I think there's, to build on what Trevor said, I would use the word surgical. Like we want to be absolutely surgical and calculated, intentional about where and how and why we're using those, because it's to influence things at the negotiating table, not to perpetuate an all-out, tariff and trade war, which nobody wants. And I think it's very dangerous when you get into energy. And I hope for Canada that we actually, I know it's a very kind of moonshot idea that we would be coordinated in our approach at a time like this. But I think when we're not, it does create fault lines that also put us in a position with some vulnerabilities.
Shauna, I like what Candace is saying. They're surgical. You think of like precision. You think of strategy. You think of the science of business and economics, cutting to the problem and alleviating it, or at least addressing it without messing about. What would be your advice to not just business owners, but to average everyday Albertans or Canadians watching this across the country in the context of a recession?
Well, I think there's lots of things that we could be paying attention to. And, it's things like, how do we look at that productivity piece? So how do we, refine ourselves in terms of, that's a huge issue across Canada. And if we can really, crack that nut, whether it's, the implementation of new technologies, new instrumentation, new machines, those types of things, I think we can really think about, workforce development strategies. I mean, we've talked, you and I, a lot about workforce development in the province with the task force, but really cracking that as well in terms of, do we have the right people in the right places, and how are we filling those roles for the future? Really thinking about that. And then really for businesses, thinking about diversifying markets and revenue streams, and where can your products go if they aren't going into the States. And of course, one of those ways is across Canada. And then I just keeping up to date. There's a lot of trade policies. This stuff is always evolving, and it really impacting businesses and shifting the landscape. So really paying attention to those negotiations and what's going on, and really using the chamber to amplify your voice, really. And to Candace's point, I feel incredibly positive, quite honestly, about 2025 as a chamber network, that this is a time that we are going to really be able to implement or impact what some of this is going to look like in terms of supporting our businesses in the province of Alberta, but across the country, to support really good, thoughtful policy and really good, thoughtful ways and means for our businesses to thrive, even though we're looking at these challenging times. So I'd like to stay positive and think that, we have this fantastic network. That's really I've heard Candace say this before, it's really the secret sauce of the Chamber Network, is that we are like in every community across this country, and we have that ability to, and Polyev has said it outright, we want to hear from the people. We want to hear from Main Street, and we have the ability to do that and really carry a voice that's going to impact change for our businesses. And so I'm quite positive actually that collaboration in 2025 might actually impact some of this change. And, I'll just quickly, back in 2019, when Kenny was, premier, just came in as premier, we had a Canadian Chamber event out east, and I wrote it down because it was one of those things that, it's hard to imagine, but he lifted 18 exemptions on trade at the Canadian Chamber of Commerce conference in Prince Edward Island at the time. And I think about that level of impact that we had, just, 18 were lifted. And if we could do that across the country with all of the provinces working together, I really look forward to how that could positively impact business and their outlook for the future.
Shauna, can I say how much I appreciate positivity and optimism heading into this year when we've been talking about economics and the fiscal reality? I don't know that everybody's feeling optimistic, but you're 100% right about the power of chambers and those business relationships and the community that's there. I'll put on folks right that are tuning in the Alberta Chambers of Commerce website at abchamber.ca, where members matter and benefits count. You can learn way more about their advocacy there and all of the different programs and initiatives they've got going. In closing, Dr. Tombe, we'll go to you. Is there some reason? I mean, give us the cold hard facts. Give us the real talk. Is there some reason for optimism? I guarantee some people have been listening to this hour and they're going, gosh, I feel like I took a bit of a punch in the gut. And sometimes you got to take your medicine. Sometimes that's the reality. Sometimes you got to burn it down before you can build it up again. But is there some reason for optimism heading into the next year?
Yeah, I think there's many reasons for optimism, and maybe I did paint a more pessimistic view in earlier comments, but Shauna's absolutely right about the power of the chamber network, but also of others to, at this moment, advocate for improvements in policy at all orders of government in Canada, local, provincial, federal. And this moment is also potentially a wake-up call for many governments that it might be time to do things a little bit differently. And that does potentially mean that we'll have some real improvements in policy. We even saw that yesterday. If you looked deep in the fiscal update, there were important changes that is hopefully just the beginning of many more to come next year that can set Canada on, I guess, a better, stronger economic path.
Really appreciate the three of you giving us in Christmas terms and holiday terms, the gift of your time and your expertise. And I know that this audience will benefit greatly from it. Dr. Trevor Tombe, professor of economics at the U of C and one of Canada's leading experts in fiscal policy, trade, and economic development. Candace Laing, president and CEO of the Canadian Chamber of Commerce. Really grateful that you made time to join us, Candace, and of course our good friend Shauna Feth, president and CEO of the Alberta Chambers of Commerce, who helped us pull all of this together. Thanks to the three of you and wishing you and yours, including your memberships, a very happy holiday season. Thanks for doing this.
Thank you.
We appreciate it. This conversation made possible by amazing Real Talk partners, including the team at Complete Care Restoration. We talk a lot about medium-sized businesses, family-owned businesses. This is one example right here. More than 25 years of experience restoring properties and rebuilding peace of mind. Complete Care Restoration has teams deployed across the province right now, helping folks, including business owners, get back on their feet after, in many cases, devastating either acts of God or just sometimes when things go sideways, a sewer line backs up or a pipe bursts when you're least expecting it. Don't try to fix it yourself and definitely don't leave it there. Complete Care Restoration will work directly with your insurance company to make sure that your place is brought back to better than it was before. They treat every project just like it was their own. We've seen them do it firsthand. They built our studio, and that's why we recommend them with 2 thumbs up at CompleteCareRestoration.ca. You know, Johnny, we talk a lot about our friends at UCAN Youth Services, and I wanted to put something kind of seasonal on your radar. I saw this just a short time ago. They're out at Southgate Centre. If you're at the mall, if you're out at Southgate Mall in Alberta's capital city in Edmonton, come and check out the Enchanted Illumination exhibit. This is a really neat opportunity to learn more about what UCAN Youth Services has planned for the new year. They've got a beautiful display set up there, and they're selling these really neat illumination balloons in support of their youth. So you can get in on the holiday cheer, grab a candy cane on your way out, and if you're not able to make it there ahead of the holiday break, don't worry about it. They'll be there until January 7th. That's Tuesday, January 7th. It is Enchanted Illumination, a magical holiday journey in support of UCAN Youth Services. You can learn more by visiting UCAN Youth Services on Facebook, or, of course, you can always check out their website. That's ucan.ca, a nonprofit charitable organization we're really proud to be partnering with, helping young people 18 to 25 out of harm's way and onto a path of economic independence. Great conversation with 3 experts of economy and business, and we're grateful for them joining us. I wanted to give a special shout out to Super Chat Ken. Just noticed his contribution, a $5 contribution by way of our YouTube Super Chat. Thanks so much, Ken. He said he appreciated the panel. He said Dr. Trevor Tombe has always, or for at least a long time, been on his list of people he'd like to have lunch with, to go pick his brain. What I think what people appreciate about Dr. Tombe, I mean, there's several things, and I thought all three of our guests did a great job of articulating their message, but he's able to take high-level stuff, and he never puts it this way, but dumb it down so the rest of us can understand it.
Hey, Ryan, there's nothing I like better than dumb information.
He dumbs it down
Dumb
so
it
the
down
average
for me.
person like
Come
us
on.
can understand
Speak
it.
to me like I'm 4.
Yeah, exactly. Hey, this was absolutely hilarious. We wanted to share this with our audience. You may have missed this. I mean, it's typically relatively serious business. The House
you're
of
talking the
Commons
video.
and Parliament. I'm talking about this
Okay,
video,
let's
and
do
I
it.
want to play the full 2 minutes here because this is absolutely worth it. So typically, we see you'll see in particular cabinet ministers, not always, but in particular, sometimes it's private members, but cabinet ministers and then the opposition slinging mud at each other back and forth and hurling insults and sometimes it's our guilty pleasure and sometimes we love it. Sometimes we'll argue it's the worst of Canadian politics and sometimes it's the best. But every once in a while, and in this case, this week, it was the holidays that was the impetus for laughs across the aisle. As a matter of fact, almost every MP that was gathered together, regardless of political affiliation, got a real kick out of this holiday message from the Member of Parliament out of Dartmouth, Cole Harbour. That's right. He's a Liberal MP by the name of Darren Fisher, represents the riding that has given us the gifts of both Sidney Crosby and Nathan McKinnon, a Nova Scotian MP that had everybody laughing in the House with his special holiday message. The kicker at the end is the absolute best, but it's pretty rock solid from start to finish.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I think we could all use a little chuckle today, so with that, I'm proud to deliver this year's Liberal Christmas roast. It was a week before Christmas. Conservative MPs were muzzled. Our investments in housing have old PP puzzled. Their party won't talk about foreign interference. For Christmas, will their leader get his security clearance? Dental care, child care, what more could there be? School food and pharmacare. Thanks to the NDP! They tore up our deal, they started to gloat. But guess what happened on the next confidence vote? Supply management and seniors. The Bloc has lots to say. I don't really understand, Mr. Speaker. Je ne parle pas français. To calm caucus rebels, we cut the GST. A small gift from the Liberals and me. Groceries are high, there's trouble with the mail. But we still have a chance to win Cloverdale? Now, Mr. Speaker, it's not a contest, so I don't mean to brag, but it's only our leader whose name is on a flag. One final thought, though, Mr. Speaker. One final thought, though. Canada ain't broke, though I will admit we may be a bit woke. Mr. Speaker, colleagues, Merry Christmas and Happy Holidays, too. May we all get a Christmas card from a Randy or two.
Very, very
Yeah,
well done.
that's-
Very,
it's
very well done.
Very
I
well
like
done.
I
Very
liked
well
his reference, and if you're listening to that on the podcast, it's obviously entertaining. But I think these are one of the ones you got to watch on YouTube because you can see his Liberal colleagues around him laughing for probably the first time in a few days after getting beat up a little bit. Not a little bit, after getting beat up a lot. But yeah, pretty hilarious. Our leader, the only one with his name on a flag, which I thought was really great.
And like the guy from the back calling out the one line about the
Wasn't that
NDP,
great?
I was like,
Thanks to the NDP.
and I'm not saying that people say, if a conservative did that. I think, hey, we're close to the holidays. They're about to take time off. Like you just said, to take a breather for 2 minutes is fine.
I don't have any sympathy for anybody that jumps in and says, the Conservatives. He took more swipes at his own party than he did. How about the reference? He says, we still have a chance to win Cloverdale. The Cloverdale-Langley City by-election was kind of flying under the radar a little bit because of everything else obviously happening with Chrystia Freeland and Sean Fraser and a $61.9 billion deficit. But the Liberals getting crushed in that by-election following the resignation of the Liberal incumbent, Tamara Jansen, the Conservative candidate, winning in Cloverdale-Langley City. So that's another win for the Conservatives. Conservatives coming up winning big time in this week. And then, of course, wrapping it up with a Christmas card from a Randy or two. I think just an acknowledgement that it's been just a tough slog.
I'm
for the
not going to
government.
lie, Ryan. I spit eggnog out through my nose when I heard that comment. That was probably the best one.
Wasn't that good?
Yeah. Have you heard about? Are we going to talk Freeland before we go? I mean, I know we've talked so much, but if you haven't heard, her new book was set to drop in February, and you're getting a Christmas gift, and I suspect I know why. But Chrystia from Peace River to Parliament Hill going to be dropping ahead of schedule this Friday, December 20th. That's straight from the publisher, House of Asani. So this is not fake news, and couldn't it be a better time to drop a book, I'd say, in this week if you want your sales to go up. But also, what's in this book, Ryan, if it's going to come out a little early? Before the new year, I don't know.
Well, here's what I wonder about that. So if this is going to be, I mean, it's like she resigns, she basically sort of like walks out with a flamethrower, right? She like pulls the pin on the grenade on her way out, and basically, talks about the prime minister's political gimmicks, takes a couple swipes at him, along with his resignation, catching him reportedly completely off guard. If the book is a tell-all, like if the book is written with her flamethrower, maybe kind of like somewhat similar to Jody Wilson-Raybould's, then you have to ask, well, if it's already written, if it's already published, if it's printed, if it's ready to go, if on a moment's notice, like if this resignation truly was a surprise, maybe to anybody except for the Freeland family or her inner circle or who knows, then you have to assume that the book is not going to be as scathing as it could be. However, if the resignation was planned, and if she was planning to walk away in February with kind of a scorched earth departure, which I'd be a little surprised at. Like, I think this is based on recent developments. I don't know Chrystia Freeland personally outside of a handful of interviews that we've done together and some correspondence with her team. Full disclosure, she did send Real Talk a Christmas card, so we appreciate that. But I don't know her well enough to say whether or not it was the GST holiday and the $250 checks that was the tipping point for her. But you have to assume there was maybe more than that. If she was planning on leaving on relatively good terms, then the book may be a little bit more benign than people are expecting. But if she was planning on leaving in February, sort of lighting a match on her way out, then people, may get what they're expecting with a book released just days after a snap resignation. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like, I'll be curious to see how into it she gets, how dirty the book gets on the inside details.
Yeah, I know. And I know I teed it up kind of like this could be, but I think you're right. I think there's two things that could happen here. Either A, the book is her glowingly talking about the prime minister, which is why she wants to get it out now and just, get people to read it, because obviously if it comes out in 2-3 months in February, it's going to be like, what the fuck? You're talking great about the prime minister who may have now at this point resigned or whatever. So she's just trying to get it out of the way. Or number two, maybe there are some things in there, and you're right. She had this resignation in her back pocket and was going to release it in February and say some things about that happened behind closed doors that maybe could be scathing about the prime minister. And now she's thinking, hey, what better time than now? And this is not revenge, but you know what I mean? Let's get it out there now. There's no better way to sell books than to put it out the week that you, jump a sinking Liberal ship.
Yeah, well said. I mean, ACAT says it sort of seems premeditated if she's got a book dropping a few days later, which does sort of feel like it, right?
And holding it till February, she was like, maybe I'll give it 3 more months.
Yeah, I just don't know. I mean, here's where I land on it. Is like she was, per her letter, like if her open letter to the prime minister is to be believed, and we read it on yesterday's show. So if you're missing it, I mean, it was a banger of an episode. If you didn't catch it on the 16th of December, that was our Monday episode, and Johnny and I are here, cameras rolling, like feels like 45 minutes after she announced. So it was like breaking news. It was a developing story. If it's to be believed, one of, probably the big impetus for her resignation from cabinet was that the prime minister on the Friday, so she resigns on a Monday morning, first thing. On a Friday, the prime minister had let's put it this way, invited her to accept a new role in cabinet. In other words, he was shuffling her.
I'd really like to put you in this back closet.
Yeah, he was firing her as finance minister, yet still expecting her to deliver the fall economic update. And she basically said, hell no. And who could blame her? So, but if it's to be believed, the content of the letter, then Friday, after she was learned of her reassignment realignment, her shuffle in cabinet, if that was kind of what pushed her over the edge, and I get it. Like, I get why you'd be pissed about that, for sure. Especially if you're someone that's, and listen, like, nobody in politics is blameless. Nobody in politics deserves all the credit. It's a bit of a team thing, and I'm sure that, you know, we look back with the benefit of time and hindsight, and Chrystia Freeland's performance as finance minister and one of Trudeau's senior cabinet ministers, probably most senior cabinet minister, deputy prime minister, obviously. You know, people will have their own thoughts on that and evaluate it with the benefit of time as we see how this all plays out. But she, for all intents and purposes, has been very loyal to the prime minister. So that's why I wonder with this book, and I understand why ACAT in our Real Talk live chat powered by Park Power says it feels premeditated. Obviously, I mean, number one, writing a book, I'm assuming it's not just Chat GPT, but number two, getting it printed, getting it distributed, right? Like these things take months, right? Weeks or months. So you have to wonder what that's going to look like. I don't know. I also want to acknowledge, just on our business front, on our business bottom line, those of you that are feeling particularly generous during the show today, I want to give a shout out to Sylvia for your $7 in the YouTube super chat. Ken K, we see yours. Thanks for acknowledging. We've got great guests and vociferous trolls. Ken, what a combo it is. And Ms. KD as well, your $5 contribution to the super chat. Thank you so much. Ms. KD says, let's see more of Trevor Tombe in 2025. Hey, how about this? Did you see the Terry Fox Fiverr?
Oh yeah,
I love this.
I got a pic here.
Is this the one story that we're going to talk about this week?
If you're watching on
all
YouTube,
Canadians, if you're watching on YouTube, you can see it right now. Beautiful bill. Out is Sir Wilfrid Laurier. In is, in my mind, and I think Canadians have voted on this before, the greatest Canadian of all time, or at least maybe a top 5.
Oh, for sure.
Top 5 on the Fiverr. How's that? Terry Fox on the new Canadian $5 bill.
My only question is, why'd this take so long? I mean, I think we've been talking about this for like 30. I can't remember a time, you know, when I was engaged in the news or became of age that I was aware of what's going on in pop culture, that we haven't been saying, why isn't Terry Fox on a bill? One of our greatest Canadians ever, one of the strongest, most courageous, most, his enduring memory is just, it doesn't even matter if you were alive, if you were born when he was alive. Everyone knows who Terry Fox is.
Yeah.
Everyone knows the story. Everyone's seen the video. Everyone is just enamored by him. So this is the best. There's no one who's going to say a negative thing about this. And if they do, hey, get out of here.
Yeah, if you do, you get punched in the mouth.
Metaphorically,
the show doesn't condone violence. So you got Sir Wilfrid Laurier, not totally disrespected. As a matter of fact, maybe promoted. I guess it depends on where how you feel about the pecking order. He's moving up to the 50. Yeah. So then you go, well, what happens to William Lyon Mackenzie King, who's been on the 50 and enjoyed that tenure for quite some time? But Sir Wilfrid Laurier will move to the 50. I don't know. How do you feel about, I mean, you look at like American currency, the American bill, the American bill is the American bill is the American bill.
Yeah.
Canadian bills change from time to time.
Yeah, let's do it.
I don't mind it. It's kind of like stamps. You know, stamps, we get the special edition loonies and toonies. I don't mind it. Do you?
No, I do not mind it at all. And here's the thing, and I don't want to come down on, because I think this is the best person who's ever been put on a Canadian note to date since I've been around. But the only thing that is kind of not great about this is we don't use money a lot anymore, right? A lot of people tap, credit card. I mean, since I got this watch, all I do is tap my wallet. I don't even take my phone or wallet out anymore. So that's the only thing. But so, yeah, I don't think changing up the people on the notes is a bad thing. I think it's great. And over time, especially on those American notes, I mean, I heard have you seen Chris Rock SNL last weekend?
No, I didn't see it.
So he was talking about American money, and he was saying it's amazing, you know, how many rapists we have on the American notes. And he was talking about slavery. It got but that's Chris Rock, right? He is right up and over the line. And it was great to hear it on SNL. And he said he went into a store and he said, how many rapists does that cost? And he took his money out. But it's just over time. Yeah, I think we should recycle. I think obviously now, like we're going to have the note with the king on it eventually. Are we not?
Well, I mean, I guess I'm trying to think of
That
what
stuff just
was
happens,
Elizabeth on the 20?
Yeah.
She was on the 20. I'm honestly having to think
I
about
saw
it. I'm like,
I
I don't
saw
know
a
the last time I
template
had
for
cash
it.
in my pocket.
I saw an official template for it. It is coming, the note, but
I've seen coins out
Yeah.
already with
Yeah.
King Charles on them.
a bill is what I'm
Yeah.
talking about. It'll most likely be the 20, I'm guessing, right?
Yeah, I think so. I'm pretty sure. Yeah, she's on the she's on the 20. So yeah, there. It's funny. It's like when I find when I get like a 5 or a 10, I like to have all the what's the denominations folded up. I've got like a tiny little billfold. If you guys know me, I can't handle having stuff in my pocket. I don't like big wallets. It's like it's like I'm the opposite of George Costanza that had like the big huge wallet with like all his like loyalty cards and the whole 9 yards. But I think that there's something great. I feel I have like a sense of peace and calm if I always have a 5, a 10, a 20, and a 50. Just fold it up nice and neat. A 5 is great for like buskers, or 10 if you're feeling generous. 20 can get you in a cab real quick if you need it, and a 50 can maybe get you out of trouble. But I find that if I have that combo of the 5, 10, 20, 50 folded neatly away, chances are it will walk with me. Like what's the opposite of disrupted? Uninterrupted. It's probably not. But I'll walk with it for like a year.
Sure.
Like when's the last? I can't remember the last time I paid cash for something. It's
Me
so
either.
bizarre how that happened.
And I didn't mean to say that I never carry cash. I do the same thing. In my DJ backpack, my producer backpack behind me, which I take, Ryan, everywhere. Like Ryan's literally like, leave your bag here while we go for lunch. But there's 2 20s in there always. You never know, an emergency, the internet goes down, you want to tip someone, they're only accepting cash because their tap is down wherever. Always keep it with me. Here's the template I saw the other day for
oh, look at that, the new King Charles $20 bill. If you're watching on YouTube, or for that matter, if you're watching on LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, X, we appreciate those of you that, of course, are TikTok, I should mention, that are watching us live every day. Great to hear from Idris as well in our live chat, powered by Park Power, who says, hey, listen, and I'll show the 10 here, the 10 spot on my screen, Johnny. But Idris pointing out as well says, don't forget, of course, that Viola Desmond on the $10 bill is hugely important. He says, I love her, and Terry Fox on there as well. And of course that 10 spot also featuring that Museum of Human Rights in Winnipeg, which is just an absolutely beautiful facility. I had a chance to visit there a few summers ago.
That's amazing.
I'm not typically like a museum art gallery guy, but that really is a spectacular spot. If you ever have a chance, Winnipeg in the summer is like one of the most wonderful places you can visit in the country. I'm not sure what I'd say about the winter, but listen, we're pot calling the kettle black
my face
here
was kind of like, because
right now.
I spent a night in a bus stop in the winter in Winnipeg when I was young. I used to snowboard, so I'd head out to BC from Ontario, and I'd take the cheapest way. Sometimes I'd bus out there 5 days.
Jeez.
And I had so I took a bus ticket from Ontario to BC, and somehow there was no buses. We get to Winnipeg at like 3 a.m. So I'm literally like, that's cold, man. Cold when you go outside and you breathe in, and every little piece of snot in your nose immediately turns to icicles instantly.
Yeah.
And I remember trying to sleep in the bus stop, and security came by and was like, what are you doing? We're going to put you in a hotel. Like, nobody should be outside, not even in like a bus terminal. Like, I was.
But have you been in Winnipeg in the summer? Have you been to the Forks?
It is nice. It is nice.
Honestly, it's an incredible place. This is like the one time I'm going to say something nice about Winnipeg, guys. So make sure you mark the time code. And a shout out to S. Scott K.
I was just going to say
our
that.
Super Chat, a $20 contribution.
And Alberta
S.
Granger,
Scott, I hope
$5.
you understand. Alberta Ganger as well.
Yeah.
Oh man, you guys, we honestly appreciate this so very much.
It's the holidays. It's a giving season.
Idris is circling back, by the way. He says, don't be dissing the peg at Christmas. It's pretty sweet. Winnipeg is a cool time. As long as Winnipeg,
We're not dissing.
as long as they start to lose a few games, the Jets do. Nobody needs the Jets fans getting high on their horse, okay? But as long as that can happen, the Oilers are going to need their Stanley Cup. I know I saw a few people talking about the rematch last night to put a little timestamp on this episode
Close
against
game,
the Florida Panthers.
Cup champs.
6-5 late in the game.
Let's do it again.
Let's do it again
in June.
Keep the fire burning. And for those of you hockey fans, for those of you hockey players, Johnny and I wanted to make sure that you knew about the Real Talk Pond Hockey Classic that's coming up on Saturday, February 1st, out in the beautiful city of St. Albert. Here's the deal, friends. You have until December 31st to register for the Real Talk Pond Hockey Classic and qualify for our early bird prize. And this isn't just any early bird prize. Thanks to our friends at Molson Canadian, the presenting sponsor of this edition of the Real Talk Pond Hockey Classic. We have 6 tickets, 6 drink rail tickets to that evening's game. The Edmonton Oilers hosting the Toronto Maple Leafs on Saturday, February 1st. That's right. This is the hottest ticket in town.
Ooh.
And you could be there with 5 friends checking out the Oilers hosting the Maple Leafs. Let's call it McDavid v. Matthews. All you have to do to qualify to win those 6 tickets is register your team for the Real Talk Pond Hockey Classic before the clock strikes midnight on December 31st. You can learn more by visiting ryanjesperson.com. Click on the events link or check out the show notes on the podcast or YouTube. The Real Talk Pond Hockey Classic, all for charity, is proudly presented by our friends at Molson Canadian. Super
Thanks,
excited
boys.
to have you spinning out there as well. That's going to be awesome.
Spinning, man. I'm going to be spinning around with our new Real Talk drone.
Yeah, that's going to be great. We'll get some
we're
good
gonna
footage
be getting,
from there.
Yeah, I'm going to be DJing and as well just having fun. Yeah. Isn't this job great? It's so fun.
It is. It's not too bad at all, buddy. Burgers, beers, bonfire, and of course the ODR. Yeah. Friends, I want to thank you for joining us on this episode of the show. We'll let you know as we are wrapping on this Tuesday. Coming up on the next episode of Real Talk, we're going to check in with our good pal Mo Amir out of Vancouver. We'll get his take on politics happening on Canada's West Coast and the impact, the continuing and developing story of Chrystia Freeland's resignation. Don't miss our Thursday episode of the show. That's the 19th, our final episode of 2025 with Mayor Amarjeet Sohi, Premier Danielle Smith, and more. We'll see you then.
Real Talk is hosted by Ryan Jesperson. Executive producer Josh Dunford. Technical producer John Hicks. General manager Katie Cook-Chivers. Account coordinator Lawrence Derlego. Human resources Lena Shepard. Website design Mike Johnston. Voiceover by me, Carrie Skelton. Real Talk's editorial board is Supriya Dwivedi, Ahmed Ali, Brandy Morin, Ann Castleman, Corey Hogan, Harman Candola, Catherine O'Neill, and Chris Henderson. Member Emerita, Julie Rohr. Real Talk is recorded in Edmonton, Alberta on Treaty 6 territory, the traditional and ancestral territory of the Cree, Dene, Blackfoot, Saulteaux, and Nakota Sioux, home to the Métis settlements and the Métis Nation of Alberta. Real Talk is a relay project. For more, check out ryanjesperson.com.